Gentlemen, I'm going to start with the sponsors, and then we'll get started with the learning, okay? So you can have your coffee and nush while I do the sponsors. Okay? All right. Learning sponsors, a year of learning, Sue and Arnie Gerlich in memory of Malka Pearl Mann and Philip Mann, and Yisrael David ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch and Beryl ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch, Yosef Meir ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch, Henya Rivka Pro Rosner, Bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch. Memory of family murdered in the Holocaust, Arav Tzvi Hirsch ben Shlomo Yaakov, Sarah bat Ephraim, Ephraim ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch, Adia bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Miriam bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Pesel bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shalom ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shlomo Yaakov ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shmuel ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch. Shall share her children and grandchildren in memory of her uncle, founding member of BRS, Dr. Israel Brook, Yisrael ben Arav Akiva, Marcia Federbush and family in memory of her husband, Dr. Uriel Paul Federbush, Uriel Pinchas ben Arav Shimon, Sharon and Fred Liska, their family and many friends, in memory of her dear mom, Harriet Friedman Edelbas Yaakov, Leslie and Gail Kaplan, in memory of their parents, Harry and Marjorie Sedell, Irving and Pearl Kaplan, friends of Avi Gidler, Avram Meir ben Shimon and Martha Gidler, China Bas Yeshaya, friends of Toby Paris, Saratova Bat Yisrael Dove, friends of Malka Levi, Malka Bat Yosef, friends of Joe Wolf, Yosef Ben Chaim, Charlie Gelfenstein and Sam Levine, in memory of Ramona Levine, Rachumata Bas Asher. A month of learning by Dov Bloodlander in memory of his wife, Udal Bas Yehuda Tzvi. Mordechai and Miriam Burr in memory of his father, Yaakov Ben Mordechai. Friends from Yarmouth E in memory of Miriam and Michael Schiffer's son, Zev David Ben Shimon Halevi. David and Mindel Cheslow in memory of his mother, Bela Bas Meir. May the Shemas have an aliyah, Kranka Rafia, Velti Yeshira Shema Tzliya, L'chol B'nai Yisrael, a good Gaben Shiyar. Okay. All right, good morning, everybody. Okay. Kaf Bet, Amud Aleph, good morning, good morning. Okay, if we can, all right. We start off with a new Mishnah, okay? All right, what happens now? Remember we were talking about using a bed as a sukkah, and we were talking about sleeping under the bed as a sukkah. We were talking about we had come across issues of a sukkah where the whole issue dealt with the boards, okay, or if we want to call the schach. Okay, let's assume for the moment that we're not using vegetation, throwing a whole bunch of branches on our sukkah, or we're not cutting down reeds or things like that, but we're simply using boards. Okay, keep that in mind. We're going to come back to that issue in a moment or two, right? Okay, now, so if I'm going to start off with a very short question, if we're talking, we're on Kaf Bet Amud Aleph. Kaf, what? Yeah, Kaf Bet Amud Aleph. Kaf Bet Amud Aleph. Yeah, Kaf Bet Amud Aleph. Yeah. So, if I want to say that I have a sukkah that is unsatisfactory, I'm going to use that term for a particular reason. Okay? Under what conditions, what examples might I give that it's an unsatisfactory sukkah? Okay, I could talk about the height of the sukkah. I could talk about the length and the width of the sukkah. I could talk about schach of the sukkah. Okay, so some of the same criteria, that's why I want to connect it and jump back in. Some of the same criteria that we saw at the very beginning of the first parak, okay, defining, okay, so these same issues still tie into our concept of what is a valid sukkah, okay, and one fulfilling the mitzvah. Therefore, as we start on Kaf Bet, Amud Aleph, the top first line, Matnit Sukkah Hamiduv Lelet. Okay, what is Sukkah Miduv Lelet? We're going to discuss that in a moment. Okay, but before we do, the Gemara, however, wants to tell us. Okay, Vishet Silata Miruba Mechamata Kshera. Okay, now. One of you might be maybe the phrase V'shetzilata meruba mechamata is the definition of meduv lelet. Okay, all right. In other words, but we have the vav there. So is that to mean to tell us that it's a separate issue, or is it simply further defining it? Okay, so I'm just laying this out. Okay, I'm laying it out so that we understand, okay, what's going to happen. Okay, next happen. So the point is I'm going to take it face value of the text. On the one hand, we have a sukkah hamaduv lelet, which we're going to have to define. Secondly, we have another statement, and, not or, okay? And also a sukkah where the shade is greater than the sun light, okay? Kshera. According to this Mishnah, in these two situations, this sukkah is a valid sukkah. We got a problem though, didn't we learn elsewhere? Okay, some other issues in regard to schach. Furthermore, third example, Hame'uva. If we have a sukkah where the schach is thickly covered, I'm going to use that term for the moment, okay? That's Art Scroll uses that translation. We'll go with it for the time being. Kimin bayit. Remember we said it was like a house because we said the homes there were often made with thatched roofs, okay? Right? So what happens? Kshera, according to the Mishnah, also it's still a valid. I'm sorry. Afal pisha ein hakochavim nir'im mitocha, even though you can't see the stars at night through the roof, kshera, it's still valid. So the first question of the Gemara, ma'i meduv lelet. What do we mean by a sukkah that's meduv lelet? Amar Rav Chisda, first example, sukkah aniyah. It's an impoverished sukkah. That might be one, okay? Yeah, I said Rav. Okay, my Rav, says Rav, sukkah aniyah, it's an impoverished, it's a meager sukkah. In other words, maybe it has a very thin layer of schach as the reverse of what might be a meucha. Okay, so that's one possible reason that Rav suggests that as his interpretation of the word. In other words, he's comparing it one to another statement still in the Mishnah. Okay, we're going to see, however, Shmuel has a different explanation. Shmuel Amar, Kaneh Oleh, V'Koneh Yored. Okay, so Shmuel says, what's his example? One reed is going up, one reed is going down. Okay, now we can take that in a couple of ways, right? One explanation might be, I have two levels of schach, okay? A lower level and a higher level, okay? If that's going to be my explanation of Shmuel, okay, then I have to ask, I'm jumping ahead, but I want to use it as an introduction still. If that's Shmuel's definition, and I have two levels of schach, is one level has another level right on top. So if I'm using boards, one is above the other, and therefore the empty spaces are parallel. Or do I have two levels? And I say, no, they're not one immediately above the other, but they are arranged so that they're offset. Okay, that where the empty space on the lower level, okay, between the boards, on the top level of schach, the board is covering the empty space. So that's one explanation for Shmuel. Another explanation is if I'm using rods, as Art Scroll wants to translate it, or reeds or whatever, okay, maybe I have certain ones going one way and certain ones going another way. I still have two layers, but they're all, okay, right on top of each other. And so I'm therefore going to talk about if I have space between the two different directions. Okay, so I felt it important to clarify that. We now can go on. Rav Tane Chada. In this case, Rav taught one halacha in regards to the entire Mishnah. Okay, Ushmuel Tani Tarte. And Shmuel, however, teaches two halachas regarding our Mishnah. So Gemara further clarifies. Rav Tani Chada. Rav taught only one basic halacha. Sukkah meduvlelet, with this kind of a sukkah, as I say, meager or a impoverished sukkah. Okay, my meduvlelet. What does it mean? Medul delet. Okay, that it is meager. All right, shetzilta meruba mechamata. Okay, that it's shade, but it's still where its shade is greater than its amount of sun, kshera, and therefore it is a valid sukkah. Okay, so even if it's taking Rav's view, even if the schach is sparse, I'll use that term now. Okay, nevertheless, it could be considered a kosher sukkah. Ushmuel Tani Tarte, and Shmuel is teaching two halachas. Number one, my meduvlelet. What do we mean by mivulbelet? It is mixed. Okay, in other words, separated, scattered. Okay, up and down, whatever. V'tarte katane. And he's teaching two halachas, sukkah mevubelet kshera, that is sukkah with, okay, intermixed. I'm going to use that term now. Okay, schach, or you particularly if I'm using boards, okay, is valid. And number two, v'tzilta meruba mechamata kshera, and a sukkah where the shade is greater than the sunlight is valid. Now, I'm going to stop here and raise a point. Didn't we already learn earlier that the whole issue of sukkah is that it's got to have more shade than sunlight? Yeah. So why does this Mishnah have to repeat and tell us this halacha all over again? Okay? So in other words, so let's see if the Gemara is going to come back and address that issue. Okay? All right, so now we go on. Amar Abaye says Abaye as follows. Okay? Lo shanu ela she'ein bein zeh lezeh shloshat tfachim. Abaye wants to tell us, okay, this argument between Rav and Shmuel was a situation where we were talking about two levels, okay, which was what we said. And the issue is there's less than the amount we need for lavut, right? That the gap between the two of them is less than 3 tfach, okay, is not, okay, is or is not within that parameter that we can use lavut. Okay, that would seem to be the perhaps one issue. She'ein bein zeh lezeh shloshat tfachim, aval yesh bein zeh lezeh shloshat tfachim. But if it has that difference 3 tfachim, or 3 or more, of course, but at least if it's less than 3, it's okay. It's lavud. If it's 3, right, between the layers of skach, if it's 3, it's no good, it's invalid.
Either layer by itself.
Okay, well, we're going to get to that. Hold on. Okay, Amar Rava. This is Rava. So Rava now wants to come and respond to Abaye. All right. Afilu yesh ben zelazeh shlosha tfachim, even if there is 3 tfachim between the 2 layers of schach, nami lo amran ela she'ein begago tefach. Okay, what is he saying here? All right, Rava. All right, that the 2 layers of the schach. Okay, if we're using boards, the question of between the boards. Okay, what happens in that case? Ela she'ein begago tefach. Right, that's our point. Aval yesh begago tefach kshera. But if there is, okay, only a tefach between it,
or less.
Okay, of course, less, it's valid. The amrinan, because we say chavot rami, we use another concept, which we say lower and cast down. Okay, in other words, if we're assuming that as I suggested to you, I'm using boards. I have 2 layers, and they're intermixed or they're interspersed, or what I said earlier, that the top one is covering the empty space of the lower ones. Then I use this concept of chavot, right? Chavot rami. It's as if the upper one falls down, and therefore it's fills in the space. Fills in the space. Right. Okay.
That's virtually.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. Exactly. Amar Rava. Right. Mana amina la. At what point do I say and use this concept of chavot rami? Right. The chi'it be tefach amrinan chavot rami. When there is a situation of a tefach that's between the boards on the lower, I'm going to call it lower schach.
And the boards themselves are also a tefach.
Right. Okay. So what happens?
And the space is one tefach.
Right.
Correct.
Right. Okay. So that's what we see there. V'chilit bei, when it's not that, okay, lo amrinin chavot rami, then do we not say chavot rami? T'tnan, as we learned elsewhere in a Mishnah, korot habayit v'ha'aliyah, we have a 2-story house, okay, and we have, okay, the bottom floor, then the house, then the top floor. The next is the ceiling for the bottom, but the floor for the top, and then we have the ceiling for the second floor. Okay, everybody with me? Therefore, the question is going to be, I'm going to now make a comparison to Tuma. And what am I going to do? What happens if the mace is in the first floor? Okay, the Tuma is going to rise, right? Is it going to go into the second story? We don't know for sure, because it may depend on where the boards of the second story ceiling is in relationship to the boards of the first story ceiling floor of the second story. Okay, that's going to be the part of the issue. So let's see what happens. Korot habayit v'ha'aliyah, the beams of the house and its attic, says the Gemara. She'ein aleihem me'aziva, and there's no plaster on the boards of the first story ceiling, second story floor. Okay? Vahen mechuvanot, and they are lined up, okay, parallel to one another. Okay? That's what mechuvanot here is. They're aligned, all right? so that one is above the other, right? Tum'ah tachat echat mehen, all right? If there's tuma underneath one, right? Right? Tachteha tameh, then what's in the lower house, that's in the first story, is tameh. Bein hatachtona la'elyona, okay? Beinehem, okay, between the lower and the upper.
It's in the upper story.
Right, it's now in the second story, right? Beinehem, tameh al gabe ha'elyona. Then only in that second story is the tuma, so to speak, active. And how high does that go? Kenegda ad rakia tameh, all the way up, right? Through the non-plastered ceiling of the second story. The tuma is going to rise, right? Hayu ha'elyonot kibein hatachtonot. And if we say that the boards of the second story, okay, are as if they're between, okay, there's right between the boards of the fourth story ceiling, right? Tum'ah tachtehen, and the tuma is in the first story. Tachat kulan tameh. Okay, in other words, if they don't cover it, then it goes tameh. Al gabehen kenegdan ad l'rakia tameh. Okay, and it would go right all the way up through the first story, through the second story, all the way up. Okay, right, the same. Right. Okay. Vataniela, and on this it was taught, b'medvarim amorim, b'zman sheyesh bahen tefach. At the point where we say there is a tefach between them, u'beinehem poteach tefach, where the boards themselves are a tefach, and here's where it spells it out, and the space between them is a tefach. Aval ein beinehem poteach tefach, but if the space between the boards is not a tefach, tuma tachet echat mehen, and the tuma is underneath one of them, right? Tachteha tameh, then the bottom one has the tuma in it. Beinehem v'al gabehen tahor.
In other words, you need two tefach.
Okay, and therefore the one on top would be tahor.
So you need a full tefach for the tumor to pass through.
Right. Okay, exactly.
Because it's man.
Right, the space, right, has to be a full tefach. Right. Okay, now alma, therefore, ki it be tefach, when there is a full tefach, amrinen chavot rami. Here we can say, therefore, lower down. Right, drop the boards from the upper story into the space of the lower story ceiling. Okay, all right. V'chilit be tefach, and when we don't have a tefach, lo amrinen chavot rami, we cannot say that shma mina. That's how we learn from that. So he's applying again an example of issue of tuma to the example of trying to apply it to sukkah.
Let me
Okay.
ask you something. These two tefachim, bottom and upper, have to be exactly under one another, or they could be in different areas?
No, they have to be directly above each other.
Have to
I'm
be
asking Rabbi Green.
here, like this, like here's one
Yeah.
and the other.
Yeah, right.
So it's got to be
In
able
other words,
to,
if it's two tefachim, but they're separated this way,
no, won't work.
that's right. Okay.
Okay, now, Yativ Rav Kahana was sitting, V'kamar lahashma'ata, and he was reviewing and saying over this particular lesson. Amar le Rav Ashi, and Rav Ashi says to Rav Kahana, V'chol hecha dalit be tefach, lo amrinin chavot rami. Are you saying, therefore, that when we don't have either the board of a tefach as well as the space of a tefach, that we cannot use this concept? Okay, Vahatanya. But here we also have taught a following bright. Kore hayotzei mikotel zeh. Now, Rav Ashi is going to use a different example, not from Tuma. He's going to use the example based on Shabbos and on having a koreh, okay, a beam across at the end of the mabui, right? Remember we learned that, okay? So the question here too, maybe I could have another example, right? And this is what he's saying. Koreh ha-yotzei mikotel zeh, the beam comes out from one wall, right? Ve'eino nagad b'kotel zeh, but it doesn't reach all the way to the opposite wall, right? V'chein shtei korot, echad yotzei mikotel zeh ve'echad yotzei mikotel zeh, or I have two beams, each coming out from opposite walls, but they don't join and touch each other above the middle of, say, of the mabui. What happens then, right? Veinan nogot zo bezo, pachot mishlosha, less than 3. Eino tzarich lahavi koreh acheret. One does not have to bring another beam, right? Shlosha, but if it is 3, tzarich lahavi koreh acheret. Then we have to bring another koreh, another board. So here too, I could use, so there I've got a definition of 3 tfachim. Before you kept saying I only had a definition of measurement of 1 tefach, or at the, right? So what's the issue? Right?
This is only a setup, he'll get to the other.
Right, okay. Rabban Shimon, right, he's going to get to it momentarily. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer. What does he say as we go over to Amud Beis, Kafbet Amud Beis? Pachot me arba'ah, ein sarich lahavi korah acher. If it's less than 4, okay, tfachim, we don't have to bring another, okay, board, another beam. Arba'ah, sarich lahavi korah acher. If it's 4 tfachim and certainly more, then we would have to bring another crossbeam. All right. Now, so this is Rav Ashi's challenge, okay, to this previous discussion.
Not yet. Now
Okay.
it's the-
Now we're going to B'chein shtei korot hamat imot. Okay, and likewise, let's say I have, using on this mabui, I have decided that I don't have a thick beam. I really don't have a 2x4. Okay, maybe I only have a 1x2. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 2 1x2s and put them across both.
3x4.
Okay, okay, I'm going to put them parallel. I'm going to put them parallel. Now, but I'm concerned that maybe that's not strong enough. Okay, and therefore I'm saying I'm putting these 2 parallel thinner pieces of wood, lo bezo kadei lekabel ariyah. But each one individually is not strong enough to hold up a brick, but I could still put a brick to rest on the 2 parallel smaller boards.
and
Okay.
maybe they'll hold.
And right, and let's hope they hold it, right? So what happens, right? V'lo bezo kadei lekabel ariyah, and this one isn't able to hold the brick by itself, okay? Right, so what happens? V'lo bezo kadei lekabel ariyah, right? Im mekablot ariyah, okay? If they can hold the brick, the 2 of them together, l'rachvo tefach. Okay, then I can only have the difference of space between the 2 thinner pieces of wood, a tefach. Ein sarich lahavi korah acheret. Then I do not have to bring, so long as the 2 thinner pieces of wood can hold up the weight of a brick, right?
And with the length of a tefach.
Okay, and the space between them is only a tefach, I'm okay. I don't have to bring another beam for that as a replacement. V'im lav, and if not, says the Gemara, tzrich lavi korachet. I would have to bring another beam. Now, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, im mekablot ariach la'archo shloshat tfachim. Says Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, if the two parallel, right, smaller boards, okay, could both together uphold a brick, la'archo shloshat tfachim. Okay, I could have a distance between them of 3 tfachim. Ein tzarich lavi korah achat. Then one would not have to bring another beam. V'im lav, and if not, tzarich lavi korah achat. Then one would have to bring another beam. So Rav Ashi has cited Rav Shimon ben Gamliel and said this issue of 3 tfachim, okay, is the viable measure, as opposed to a single. Oh, now, hayu echat lemala ve'echat lemata. But we were talking about the example of in the mabui that the thin pieces of wood were parallel. Okay? And so maybe there I might say 1 tefach, 3 tefachim, but they're parallel. Our example of the sukkah was that the schach was not on the same level. One level of schach was higher than the other. And so now I come back now to the key point here. All right? So that's what he's saying. Hayu echat lemala ve'echat lemata. What happens if those 2 pieces of wood that I want to use for the mabui are not on the same level? Rabbi Yossi Omer, right? Bar Yehuda Omer, Ra'in ha'elyona ki'ilu hi lemata. See the upper one as if it's lower. Ve'at ha'tachtona ki'ilu hi lemala. And see the lower one as if it's raised higher, right? Okay. Ubilvad shelo tehei elyona lemala me'esrim amma. So long as the upper one is not more than 20 amas above, right? Va'tachtona lemata me'asara, or the lower one is lower than 10, right?
Yeah, he does not mean one is 60 feet in the air and the other is 4 feet in the air. He means the 2 of them have staggering, but not the higher of the 2 cannot be above
Right,
20.
certainly.
And
The lower
in a
one.
different case altogether, the lower of the 2 can't be below 10. He does not mean there is a 19 and whatever
In the
gap.
same one.
There's only a 10 gap.
No.
No.
The gap is just a little bit, but they're both either very high. It could be anywhere in a range from 20 up to 10, 12.
Ha zeh v'zeh b'toch esrim. So there, amrin and chavot rami. So long as the 2 unparalleled pieces of wood are within a certain reasonable range, what he's suggesting is 20, we could use the concept of chavot rami.
Which is level them all.
Okay? Afal gav delete be tefach, even though there is not only
Neither board is a
tefach, right?
individual.
So in other words, so this is a challenge to what was said before. Okay? So what happened? So Marle said to him, Taritz ve'emahachi. Okay? Now, to explain Taritz here, one translation wants to say answer, one translation wants to say explain it. Okay? So in other words, come back with an answer. All right? That's how I would use it, colloquially. And I would say the following. Ubilvad shelo tehei elyona lamala me'esrim ela b'toch esrim. So long as it's certainly not higher than 20, but within the 20. V'hatachtona smucha la pachot mishlosha and the lower piece of board, wood, whatever, okay, is close enough to it so that it's still within 3 tfachim. Inami, or the other way, bilvad shelo tehei tachtona lemata me'asara. Or I'll say that the lower piece of board is certainly not below 10, okay? Right?
Yeah.
Lemata, all right? Right? Shelo tehei tachtona lemata me'asara. Ela lemala, and the other one, okay?
Ela lamala misor, it's about
Ela
10.
lamala me'asara, but rather it's higher than 10. The Elyona, and the top one, okay? The top one, smucha lag pepachot mishlosha, and that top one is close enough within 3, right? 3. All right. Aval shlosha, but if we go on now, aval but 3, kevan delit be tefach, because the piece of board may not be a measurement of a tefach, lo amrinan chavot rami. Okay, that we therefore can't use that concept of chavot
It's more
rami.
than 3.
Okay, if it's 3 or more. Okay, all right. No, but we're also saying that if the piece of wood
It's not a
itself
tefach.
is not a tefach, that's the point that he's finishing up with. Okay, so we maintain at least part of what was said before, that piece had to be, the pieces of board or wood, okay, had to be a tefach, and ideally, okay, what we are saying though is the space. Okay, let's go on now, says the Gemara, to a new piece from our Mishnah, right? And we said that the shade is greater than the amount of sunlight. It is valid. Okay. Now remember, I asked the question. Didn't we learn this already? Okay. Why do we have to repeat it again? Okay. Good reason that we might repeat it again is because we're going to, even though we said earlier that was a requirement for a kosher sukkah, maybe we're going to learn something new, all right, in this discussion, and therefore that would give a reason why we would have to repeat this particular halach. Okay?
I just would like to add, if you had a staggering size, or a staggering schach, high, low, high, low, high, low, high, low, it is, and the sukkah is oriented north-south. You have to have it oriented.
Okay.
Then when the sun travels.
Wait.
Okay.
Okay. Now let's go, and we're going to go into something else at this point with this particular section of the Mishnah, and to clarify what Michael was moving into is the following. We know that the sun travels a certain amount, right? And therefore we know that the angle of sunlight from one direction and to what degree there would be shade from the schach inside the sukkah is going to be very different than when the sun is directly overhead of the sukkah, and the amount of shade may be different. Okay, now we can go on, and then we'll come back. Right? So what happens? Ki hadadi. So the Gemara asks, what about if the amount of shade and sun are equal? Right? This would seem to imply, when we say more shade than sun, that therefore when they are equal, psula, it would render that sukkah invalid. Vahatnan, but aren't we taught be'idach pirkin? Aren't we taught in a Mishnah, in another case, right? In an earlier example, v'shechamata meruba mitzilta, that when the amount of sun is greater than the amount of shade, psula, it is invalid. Therefore, I derive from that Ha ki hadade, that when they're equal, kshera, it seems to be they would be equal and be a valid sukkah. Lo kasha, says the Gemara. It's really not a problem. Kan milamala. In one case, it's above. All right. In other words, the ratio of sunlight to shade from above. Okay. Or what I might say, okay, is again thinking how much sun comes in at one point. All right. And how much, if that comes from a certain angle for the moment, okay, it could be that I would have less shade and more sun in the floor of the sukkah. But when it's overhead, I'm going to have, then I will have more shade than sun. Okay?
Robert, does that mean that, like say, before noon, this thing could be kosher, and after noon might not be?
No, it's
Depending
kosher
on
all
the
the
sun?
time.
Okay?
Yeah, that's what-
I'm saying that so long as it would seem to imply, at least this is how I understood it, that so long as at least at some point in the day, let's say when the sun is directly overhead, that I have more shade than sun, that tells me that the sukkah is kosher all the time.
Even
Okay.
though sometimes it's gonna be more sun.
Even though,
Sometimes.
Oh, even though the sun later on.
If you picture a flashlight beam and you shine it on a wall, it's this wide in your hand, but it's this wide on the wall. Similarly,
That's not
spaces in the sky,
Equal.
the sunbeams wide.
right?
So and earlier or later in the day, those gaps
Yeah,
would be
come on.
more
Right.
direct because
More or less.
greater, because you're talking
It's
about
about
an
an
angle is longer than a direct line.
Right. Okay.
So
So,
when
I-
it says
I knew it,
above,
Gary.
it's looking out through the roof, and is there more shade than sun or
Right.
more sun than shade?
okay.
When it says below, it means looking at the bands of shade.
Are we
on the
looking at
ground.
it coming through, or are we looking at on the ground, on the floor of the sukkah?
Okay, so as long
Right.
as it's
Right?
at
So that's
one
the case.
point,
Right.
All right? So
as
Khan,
long as at some point,
Michael,
either
okay.
up or down, it's at least. more
Khan
shade.
milamala, Khan milamata. So in other words, if you're looking up, okay, or looking down, all right? So if it's an angle, okay, you're going to see more spread of the light. That's the point. Amar Rav Papa, Hainu da Amre Inshe. This is what people say. Kezuza mila'ayil, ke'istera milatachat. In other words, when it comes through the roof, it's a small amount. It's like the size of one coin, a smaller coin. I'm going to say, let's say the amount of like a dime, right? And what happens, but when it hits the floor, it's going to be the size of a quarter, okay? Something like that. Okay,
But then even when it's a smaller size, once it's been kosher, it's okay.
it's right,
And you can sit under it and eat it.
Right.
exactly. Okay, now we get to a new piece from our Mishnah. Me'uva kimin bayit. If we said that the schach was very thick, right? A thatched roof, very thick, okay, and may be considered like a house. We're concerned people are going to say, they're going to look at it and say, that's not a sukkah, that's a thatched roof house. Okay, Tana Rabbanon, says the Braita, HaMe'ubah kimin bayit, one that is thickly covered like a house. Afal pi she'ein hakochavim nir'in b'tocha. Even though you can't see the stars through it, right? Kshera, it is valid. Ein kochvei, yes, ein kochvei chama nir'in b'tocha. Right, we're saying that the kochvei chama, the beams of light, okay, cannot be seen, right? From the sun, cannot be seen. Bayit, Beit Shammai poslim. Beit Shammai says that sukkah is invalid. Beit Hillel machshiri, and Beit Hillel says it's kosher. Okay. I want to just go over a little bit. Matnitin, real quick. Says our Mishnah, ha'oseh sukato berosh ha'agala, one who makes his sukkah on a wagon. Okay? Oh, berosh hasfina, or on the top of a boat. Kshera, it is valid, even though it's a, what we would call a moving or a rocking sukkah. All right? All right, what happens? Va'olim la b'yom tov. And one can actually enter it on Yom Tov, right? Berosh ha'ilan, one who makes it on the top of a tree. Oh, al gabe gamal, or on the top of a camel. And I have to tell you, in the Koren, they actually have a picture, okay? A live picture of a camel with a sukkah on it at the top. Somebody, all right?
Somebody sits on.
It would
Only
be,
on Chol Moed.
okay, we're gonna get to that. All right? Kshera, it's valid. Ve'ein olim la b'yom tov, but you can't go up into that sukkah on Yom Tov on the camel. Right? Now, what happens? Shtayim be'ilan ve'echad b'dei adam. If two of the walls are made such that they are formulated by the use of the tree, okay, and one wall by a person, Oshtayim b'yedei adam ve'echad be'ilan, or two of the walls are made by a person and one is made using a tree, kshera, it's valid. Ve'ein olim la b'yom tov, but you can't enter that sukkah on Yom Tov. Okay? Well, yes, Eretz Yisrael one day.
The trees attached to the grounds too?
Sure,
Yeah.
Shalosh b'yedei adam. Three of the walls of the sukkah are made by a person. Ve'achad be'ilan, and only one wall is theoretically made by using a tree. Kshera, it is valid,
And you can-
right? Ve'olim la b'yom tov. Okay, and we can go into that sukkah on Yom Tov, right? Zeh haklal, because this is the general principle. Kol she'yinatel ha'ilan v'yichola la'amod b'fnei atzma kshera. If you could remove the tree and the sukkah would stand by itself, it's still a valid kosher sukkah, right? Va'olim la b'yom tov, and we can get into it on Yom Tov, and that's where we'll stop. All right, we'll pick up tomorrow.
I brought up